Welcome back to the channel. We're in the workshop today because it's a bit wet and windy out. I was doing some work on my A3 special the other day, fitting some fork gaiters. These things, not that, that's my latte. And I thought I wanted a video because there are two different types of forks fitted to Tomos mopeds, depending on their age, and they are not interchangeable without a bit of kind of modifications. So let's take a closer look. So this is your upside down forks because the stanchions are at the bottom. These were fitted from the 70s up until about 85 on all models, but only on the A3M up until about 87 until that bike was discontinued. These are what's known as the right way up forks. These were fitted from 85 onwards on A3ML, A3MS, Disco, and the A35 Tango and Calibri models. As you can see, visually quite different. Stanchions at the top on these ones. There's nothing really that's interchangeable on them, hence they require a bit of modification to swap between earlier and later frames. Right, so to take these apart, you can actually leave the yokes and everything, kind of most of it actually still attached to the frame. Obviously drop the wheel off, your mudguard off, cables, but the top yoke, leave everything attached to it, just undo these two nuts and the big one there. And then you can take the top yoke off with everything assembled to it and just rest on your frame. Underneath there's a nut on each one of these. Under those, what you'll find is the stanchions will just slide out. There's a little rubber kind of peg underneath those fork seals, but they will just drop straight out. Very rarely have these C's. They do suffer from corrosion, but because all your kind of water and grit and dirt can't get washed up into them, they very rarely seize. Other than that, fairly basic moped style of fork. Right way up forks, however, are kind of more like motorcycle forks, except that they don't have proper fork seals on them. All they have are these rubber boots, and this is kind of the downfall. You tend to get a lot of water, grit, dirt get washed down into the actual sliders. There are two little drain holes at the bottom, but they get blocked up. Eventually it all corrodes inside and they start to seize, so you'll need to take them apart to service them. To do that, these are even simpler than the upside down forks. You just 19mm bolt at the top of each fork leg, two 13s there, and providing you've got your wheel and your mudguard and all your cables disconnected down here, you can then just slide the whole fork leg out of both yokes. Don't worry about your headlight or anything like that, because these will stay in place and you can just slide the leg out from inside the actual headlight mounting brackets. Right, if you've bent your fork leg, or it's seized, or it's both, this is where the fun begins. Because these two parts here is what this slider actually slides up and down the stanchion on. The only problem is, this is not chrome plated, it's just mild steel. Even though this is chrome plated, what happens is any grease that was around it gets washed off down into the bottom of the actual slider, and it starts corroding your spring, and yeah, it's not great. So to undo them, the idea is you twist this off until you feel the kind of spring release. If it's twisting and it's not doing anything, it's just binding the spring up, leave it, don't go any further. If you feel it release, you'll find that you'll be able to just kind of push this down a bit and it will get stuck. And the reason it's getting stuck is because the corrosion in here is binding up on these two parts here. So you get it so far and you won't get any further. Clamp that in a vise, spray down there with loads of kind of a releasing fluid. But whatever you do, don't whack this bracket here because you'll bend it. What you want is to fit something in there, that M12 thread, to pull it out. That thing is a slide hammer. One of these tools. So, handle there, you hold this bit and just whack it up against that end. Underneath that adapter there is an M12 thread, and this is what I use. It works a treat. This came with a set of blind bearing pullers, but it's perfect for this application. It does take a bit of effort to do, but eventually it will come out. Fortunately, in my case, I found the spring had snapped. It's an old brake, it's all quite rusty. It's not the end of the world if this happens though, because you can replace the spring. So the spring is actually kind of screwed onto a little alloy insert at the end of it. That has a thread that screws in to a little stud at the bottom of the slider, and on the inside there's a fitting for an 8mm Allen key socket or hex socket. All you got to do is find a socket that's long enough to clear what's left of the spring, extension bar down inside the actual slider, and undo it. To take the broken spring out of this side, there's a pin there that you need to hammer out with a drift. There's something similar to that kind of alloy kind of fitting at the top of the spring. Once you've done that, take the spring out, take those little alloy fittings off, put them onto your new spring and put it all back together again, job done. If you find that when you're trying to twist this off it binds off, don't go any further because it will snap the spring. What you've got to try and do, I've done this myself, is clamp that in the vise, get somebody to pull the stanchion as far as they can until they reveal a little bit of the spring, and just put something flat in there, but strong, you know, piece of flat steel plate or something like that to lock the spring against the top of the slider. You can then take that pin out and then remove the stanchion. If you don't do that, the spring will try and disappear back inside the actual slider, which is a little bit tricky to get back out again. These are compression springs, so you know, they don't like being extended too much, so you be careful when you're doing that. Okay, so say you've got an early model A3 with the upside down forks, and you want to put like a modern set of upside down ones on there, aftermarket ones, or you got a decent set of, you know. One thing to bear in mind is you'll need to replicate the steering lock stop, not the security one, but the one that actually stops it from hitting the tank on either kind of rotation of the handlebars. So this is what the actual steering angle sort of lock stop consists of on the actual bottom yoke. So what you need to do is replicate what is used on the late model frame on your early model frame, and that is this little steel tab that is coming down from the middle of the actual on this is fitted to the actual part of the security lock, but I'll show you what you need to do on like an A3K frame. This is my A3K. It's going to be the same frame as all your pre-85 bikes, so you kind of got to weld that tab to the steel tube just above the bearing cup, not the bearing cup itself, but the actual steel tube. So it needs to kick out a little bit and then down, so it then can line up with the back of the yoke to limit your steering angles. If you want to do the reverse of that kind of swap and you want to fit the upside down forks to a later model frame for whatever reason, maybe you like the look of them, whatever, a couple of things to bear in mind. This, if you want a cheap and cheerful way out, this is the kind of lock stop on this type of fork. You could cut that off and fit them straight on, but the problem is there's nothing then to stop the back of the fork tubes from hitting your tank on full kind of rotation of the handlebars. So leave that in place, but you've got to do some modifications to your frame. Now if you've got the actual security kind of ring that goes right the way round the bearing cup, you can just about get away with just cutting the front half away. So a line there, right the way around on the other side. It's only held on by spot welds, so not that hard to do. And with a bit of tweaking of that lock stop on the bottom yoke, it should kind of interact with this to limit your steering angles. Some frames though only have, it's not a complete ring, it's only halfway, and it's only on one side, it's not front or back, it's like left or right. So with that type you've got to cut off altogether, and that's what I had to do on my A3MS trike. So there you go, upside down forks on an 87 A3M trike. Not fitted as standard, wasn't even a trike as standard. So what I had to do is cut that security ring off because it's only the half sided one, and weld on a tab of a thick kind of steel bar either side to act as my lock stops. So there you go, hope that was useful information, and thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care.